the general manager here at Old York Cellars. I'm also a certified sommelier and have been in the wine business for over 15 years at this point. I got into the wine business after studying abroad in Italy, got a taste of wine literally and figuratively while there, and have been working in various sort of aspects of the wine business ever since.
My name is Gares. I'm the winemaker here at Old York Cellars. I've been doing this now for 22 years, working in the wine industry. I started out in the fields, planting vines, producing crops out in the fields, establishing vineyards, and eventually worked my way to the indoors and became a winemaker. Today we are going to be tasting the Southpaw White, which is a fortified port, which is done with a Riesling grape. And we're also going to be doing the Southpaw Red, which is a fortified Marshall Foch, which is our red port.
Port wines are wines that start as a still wine and then are fortified with some sort of a distilled spirit to stop the fermentation process, thus leaving a bit of residual sugar and a higher alcohol content. So port originated in Portugal, and actually more importantly in the Douro Valley of Portugal, which is inland from the city of Oporto, which is where it gets its name. The grapes and the wines that are produced in the Douro Valley are a little bit more robust, a little bit more fruit forward. The history of sort of the English drinking taste liked a wine that was a little bit more fruit forward, a little bit sweeter. But also there was some conflict. Britain had declared war against France, so the English were not able to get any wines from France, so they had to go in search of wines from another region. So they came across these wines being made in Portugal that actually had a fortified spirit added to it. And it brought up the alcohol content, it brought up the sweetness, and coincidentally it also it did really well in making the journey, and they had to go a long way. So they were transported from inland Douro to the city of Oporto, which is a port city, which is where it gets its name, and then it traveled over to Britain. And so yes, adding the distilled spirit helped it make its journey and also kept the shelf life longer. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting about our ports. I think that's a question you probably get. I get all the time. Once I open it, how long is it going to last?
Generally, I say about 3 nights. If you have about a glass of it a night, that's about how long these bottles will
That's
last.
how long it usually lasts with stuff. So first we're going to start with the white port, which like we said is made with the Riesling grape. And one of the things I think is really interesting to talk about when we're talking about ports is sort of the viscosity. For people sort of tuning in, if you're not familiar with what the viscosity is, that's when you sort of swirl a wine in your glass, that's going to be sort of the legs that you see. And I think in these two ports, if you've never really noticed them in a glass before, you're really going to notice them in this.
What it does is you're going to have a little bit more of a golden characteristic to these, where they're aged a little bit longer. The ports are. These are usually aged about a year and a half before bottling, where the dry Riesling and the sweet Riesling that I do with the same grapes, they're done within about 9 months. So from beginning to end, the process is a little bit longer in these, so you're going to get a little bit more yellow characteristic out of it.
Yeah, you can definitely see that. If you want to hold it up to sort of a white sheet of paper, you can really see that it has a very sort of golden color to it. But even though it is white, you really do sort of see the legs, as they call them, dripping sort of very slowly down the glass. And that kind of gives you a couple different clues. It can tell you if wine is higher in alcohol content, and it can also sort of clue you in sometimes with age. So one of the things I think is really interesting to point out with the white port is, while it's made from Riesling, I feel like the characteristics of this as opposed to the still version are very different. I normally get that with the Rieslings that we have here, our dry Riesling and our sweet Riesling. I get more of that traditional sort of apple characteristic, the petrol, the mineral, whereas this, it's definitely there, but it's more of like maybe a candied apple or a honey, or like you were saying, a butterscotch, which is very different than your traditional Riesling. And I find that to be, just maybe the spirits being added to it, the fortification process.
Well, this one here, when it was fortified, I tried around about 10 bricks. So by the time the brandy got into it, around 10, 9.5 bricks, what it is, the amount of brandy that I brought into it, brought it up just a little over 20%. So it's about 20.6% in alcohol. But what it also did is it kept the natural sugars behind, which ended up being about 7.5% in
Which is
residual
high.
sugar.
So Scott, I know that a lot of times you refer to the aroma wheel when you're trying to pinpoint maybe some of the things that you're smelling in wine. How would you sort of use that tool to pinpoint things in this wine?
It narrows down a lot more characteristics to it. So when you go to a liquor store and you're reading the back of the wine bottles, or they have those little tents set up and it talks about the wine, and you wonder, how do they get that apricot characteristic into it? How does somebody pull that out? Well, when you go with an aroma wheel or a tasting wheel, what it does is it helps you narrow that down. It starts with a large section where it might be fruity, and then it will broadcast down into a smaller scale where it broadens out even more. So maybe it's a tree fruit, maybe it's more nutty, maybe it's something else, and then it broadens out from there, and it'll actually say, hazelnut, or it'll say butterscotch, or it'll say honey, or it'll even come around, like when we're talking about Cabernets, it'll go into like green pepper characteristics to it. Or like some of the Merlots or the Shiraz will have a little bit more of that black licorice character to it. This will actually help you pinpoint something down. And for like the Rieslings and stuff, there are always a lot more in that green apple characteristic to it, very acidic. Where in the ports here, now you're going into a softer scale, so you're going to be on the other side of the aroma wheel, where you're going to be into the more sections of the butterscotch, the butter characteristics to it, the honey in that area there.
So on the palate, I'm getting a lot of the sort of honey. I get a little bit of raisin, maybe sort of more of like a golden raisin, because it definitely is in that sort of flavor category. A little bit of the butterscotch like you were talking about.
Yeah, it's very soft because it doesn't have any of the acid notes to it that usually tend from the Riesling, where with this one here, it does have that soft characteristics to it. In that realm of the honey is very soft on the palate.
I get a little bit of the alcohol on the finish, but not significantly.
Yeah, not where it gives you that heartburn characteristic to it. So it's very nice. It's very smooth. It's got very good, like you said, very long characteristic to it. Very long tasting notes, as you want to call it.
But the alcohol dissipates quickly on the finish, aside from a little bit of the heat. But I definitely think that the flavor characteristics linger. So I definitely get that sort of honey characteristics lingering, and the appley, but maybe more sort of like a baked appley characteristic kind of lingering. It's very, very nice. 2011 white port. Oh, sorry. I was gonna go 12, and I was like, no, that's 12. Our 2012 Southpaw Red Port. This wine is made with Marshall Foch, which is all estate grown here at Old York Cellars on the property, so we're very proud of that. And this is also a fortified wine, made in a similar fashion to the white port, but definitely different sort of modifications to the process, when you add the alcohol, when you stop the fermentation, that sort of thing.
It's done very similar with the Riesling. This one here is done in a ruby style, which means it is very fruit forward. It's more done in the lines of a young style port. Unlike the tawny ports where it aged a little bit longer, this one's aged just a little, just for a short period of time in the oak. So it just gives it that little bit of characteristic of oak, but looking for more of a fruit character on the palate is what you're looking for. So with the Marshall Foch, where generally the Marshall Foch is very early to ripen. It's very early bud break, so the deer like it in the springtime, but it's also very, since it buds out early in the springtime, it also ripens earlier. So generally the Marshall Foch is usually harvested about the last week in August or the first week in September. It's a French-American hybrid, so it grows very well here on the East Coast. It's very popular up in the Finger Lakes area, Long Island, Up and down the East Coast, it's very popular because it's very vigorous,
Cold hardy.
cold hardy,
Yeah.
but it also, you can yield very highly, where like the Riesling, you're only yielding about 2.5 tons to the acre. With the Marshall Foch, you're up around 7 to 10 tons to the acre. So you can get a lot more area
Yeah.
for the land, you get a lot more fruit off of it. The two different styles that they do with the Foch is they either make it into a little bit of a dessert wine like we do here with the port, or they make it into a very heavy, sort of earthy style red wine. Because the clusters are very small, so you have a lot of grapes per cluster, so you have a lot more skin contact. So it's going to give you a lot more tannin structure to it than something that has a very large grape, sort of like the Concord, which is also on the East Coast here, which has a very big grape, so the skins is not nearly as thick onto them, so you're not going to get the tannins out of that. Where in the Foch, you will. When you're doing a port style, it's only on the skins for a certain period of time because you're always checking those sugar levels because you're adding the brandy to it at a certain time. So when you want to add the brandy to it, you have to take it off the skins. So it's only on the skins for maybe 2 days. So you're not going to get that real heavy tannin structure to it. So you're going to get a lot more fruit character or structure out of it.
So already you can start to see the color, very rich garnet color, very, you get a little bit of the sort of, I don't want to call it tawny because it's definitely a ruby port, but it's definitely has a little bit of age look to it. So we talked a little bit before about the viscosity, also known as the legs of the wine, and this one, of course, being a little bit higher in alcohol and a little bit higher in sugar, you're getting some nice legs when you swirl the glass. They're sort of traveling down quite slow, which lets you know that it is higher in alcohol than maybe your standard table wine. Cherry.
Definitely cherry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's got that little bit of oak into it, so you're getting that little bit of a smoky cherry characteristic to it.
But this is definitely, I mean, that's the fruit that jumps out. Sometimes when you taste red wines, you're like, oh, it's maybe a little black cherry, little black raspberry, you know, whatever it is. This one, you stick your nose in the glass, it's like boom, cherry. Again, an amazing job of balancing the alcohol with the sweetness. This is not, even at 20% alcohol, this is not overly alcoholic at all.
And for a port, this actually isn't all that sweet. This is only about 5% residual sugar. So it's a little drier than the white port that we have here, but it's still nicely balanced.
Yeah.
pH is a little bit higher onto it. It's about 3.9, so it gets that soft characteristic to it. And with the flavor, besides the cherry, you almost pull a little cedar.
It's very deadly. You could easily get a glass into this, 2 glasses into this, and never realize how much alcohol is there. It's amazingly balanced.
So with the tasting wheel and the aroma wheel, when you're looking at these here, you can come into it and you can actually see that, you know, it starts off with a fruity characteristic, comes into a tree fruit, and then you can narrow it down where it has like a cherry characteristic to it. And also when I come over into the woody section onto it, because it has a little bit of oak characteristics to it, you can come into the, you know, the burned area here and you get a little bit of that smokiness. You come over into the, like, a little bit of the tobacco, a little bit of the cedar that you pull up onto it. So you can really narrow down the characteristics and the flavors that you get out of it.
So again, I mean, some may say it's full body only because of the alcohol, but I don't know. I kind of feel like it's somewhere in that medium to full. It's not overly overpowering or
no, but it's got a very
big.
quick. It's got a very quick sort of taste to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't have that long, lingering character to it. You pull up a little bit of that cherry and that little bit of smokiness to it, but it does finish clean. It's a very clean, you know, drinking port.
This would be amazing with like a chocolate dessert. You know, just a nice dark chocolate cake of some kind, or a mousse, you know, things like that. Anything that's got like a rich sort of chocolatey taste. I think we did it once with like a chocolate creme brulee, again, because you have sort of that richness from the chocolate, but then even like the brulee on the top, I think would sort of play really nicely with the sort of that candied flavor that I'm getting from it. So this was our 2012 Southpaw Red Port made with Marshall Foch, and the first one we tried tried again was